Hello! Welcome back to C's Story Corner. Let's return to my youth romantic comedy As Wrong as I Expected, Book 5. As a reminder, I'm reviewing the book, not the anime. After the clear-cut theme of the last book, it took me a bit to figure out the big purpose of this one. And man, I even had numerous mentions in my notes, showing I got it from the beginning, so I feel pretty duncy for not putting it together faster. At first, this book feels pretty light and fluffy before turning heavy, until I realized how desperate the entire story was. From page 1, Hachiman's constantly trying to convince himself he's the same as he's always been, that he'll never change, all while trying to reaffirm his beliefs, and himself. It was pretty tense. So, why didn't I put 2 and 2 together? Who knows, probably just some glitching from my poor broken brain. Anyway, Book 5 is on the shorter side, but it's packed. Only it doesn't seem that way at first, not until you realize Hachiman has doubled down on all his beliefs and attitudes from Book 1 that had been slowly tapering throughout the last 3 books. And if you think about it, it makes perfect sense. If you remember from my last video, or have read the book yourself, Hachiman's feeling pretty powerless right now. And not his usual powerlessness that's left him beaten down until he's given up. This one is new, and he isn't used to it. After finding out about Yui being the dog owner, Hachiman realized he was the best at losing. Oh, poor Hachiman-kun. How naive you were to think that that made you the best at losing, because this book showed just how much worse it gets for you. For a little setup, the last bit of summer vacation is quickly slipping away. Way too quickly. While he's wasting it like he normally does, sleeping, video games, reading, and summer prep courses, he's also dealing with what he calls flashbacks to being hit by the car. But since we never see him have one of these flashbacks, the psychologist in me wonders if it's not more along the lines of intrusive thoughts, as that seems to fit Hachiman a little more accurately. I guess that technicality doesn't really matter. Suffice to say, he's being haunted by the accident and the parting from the summer camp that forced unpleasant truths into his life. Moving on, event-wise, not much happens in this book until the end, but don't let that turn you off. It was actually quite brilliantly written. Reading this actually brought back memories of willing away my summers with one book after another and actively trying to forget every day since moving to that accursed place. You know, well, even without living in... yeah. Most of us at least had one summer of doing nothing and being content to do so, right? That's how reading this felt. There were little things that happened for Hachiman. His sister Komachi watching Yui's dog, Hachiman attending prep courses, and getting to go on a date with Saika, and it being crashed by Zaimakuza. Seriously, dude, don't butt in on other people's gatherings. It's fine if they invite you to join, though. Just don't assume. That's totally rude and 100% against the loner's code. Anyway, it's not until Komachi forces Hachiman into escorting Yui to the summer fireworks that they run into Haruno, Yukino's sister, that the intensity running through this book bubbles up. Like I said earlier, Hachiman is faced with a powerlessness he isn't used to, and doesn't know how to handle. Being a loner, there's no one he can confide in, not that he'd be comfortable doing so anyway, so he's stuck trying to console himself. Despite having shown quite clearly he understands Yukino and Yui fairly well, and better than most, as far as we see on screen, he falls back into his biggest security blanket. Quote, "Just as no one understands me, neither do I understand them. You can't forget that." If only it stopped there. Throughout the story, he keeps repeating one comforting platitude after another, trying to find some way to reconcile what happened, what he'd been evolving into for months, and his image of himself and Yukino. Quote, "I don't trust any form of kindness so filled with deceit and so delighted in its own self-sacrifice." Quote, "That's why it's presumptuous to believe you can really understand something. Acting like you do is a sin. It is evil." Quote, "I'm not having any more misunderstandings, making any more assumptions, or getting the wrong idea ever again." Quote, "I don't trust other people much, but I trust myself less." Quote, "The truth always shatters someone's peace." Kindness, understanding, getting the wrong ideas. It feels like he's boasting that these are traps he avoids, but he's not. He's scolding himself for knowing better, but letting himself get sucked into the kindness he enjoyed, the familiarity and understanding he'd become comfortable with. He's angry at himself for the assumptions that he made and the misunderstandings that followed because of it. He's angry at himself for ruining the one good thing he'd managed to acquire in his life, And he's angry for thinking it was a good thing if it fell apart so quickly and easily. Because if all it took was seeing her car to fill him with this sort of turmoil, to tear the peace they'd enjoyed, then how worthless was that? And how worthless was he for thinking it was something to want? What's sad is it's not just reaffirming his old beliefs and behaviors. There are a number of times when he's thinking internally, commenting on something, but you know he's sublimating his own feelings over the situation into those thoughts. Quote, "What if everyone is desperately chasing after the crowd, not to be left behind?" This mirrors a similar thought he has near the end, only it's more self-directed, leaving the reader to believe he's slowly starting to acknowledge what's actually bothering him about all this. Quote, "The world is constantly leaving me behind, so I am always struggling upstream." At first, he's able to keep this thought as one directed at others. He's not this way, others are. Everyone, a nebulous form word that means nothing, and that he doesn't like when others use, are desperately chasing the crowd. Everyone is just part of the horde, trying to keep up, so they stay part of that solidarity. All while a loner like him can stand back and watch them struggle futilely to connect and belong, when it's not truly possible. Because it's not possible to understand others enough to do so. But that's the problem. For a semester he was gaining understanding and forming connections. It might not be with the nebulous everyone, but it was with his own little group. In a world of everyone, he'd found a stream of a few people he felt some sort of ability to stand with. Only, they were leaving him behind. And now, no matter how he struggles, the distance between them is just growing larger. It started with learning about the lie of omission from Yui. And just as things were settling down and becoming comfortable again, he finds Yukino has done the same thing. Only this time it hurts more. This time he feels further behind. This time, it's different. But he doesn't really know why. Not once does he think, I'll reset our relationship just like I did with Yui, and we'll start over. Not once does he consider confronting her. He just keeps trying to convince himself that he's the same as he was before meeting them, and nothing that's happened the last few months matter. Now, this begs the question, why is it different with Yukino than it was with Yui? Well, when Hachiman found out Yui was the dog owner, it was during the semester, so you could argue that seeing her every day forced him to confront the betrayal, while being on summer break actively prevented him from being able to confront Yukino. But I don't think this has anything to do with it. I think it has to do with his perceptions of Yui versus Yukino. For Hachiman, Yui is an entirely different breed. She's cute and popular and a total dunce. She's social and perceptive and is good with people. She's pretty much the total opposite of him. And though he didn't care for her at first, both because of how she treats him and her position of popularity at the school and in class, he did come to feel amiable toward her. Despite her total jerkiness to him, they still interacted enough for him to gain both a level of understanding of her and comfort in that understanding. He came to enjoy the familiarity of her. But Hachiman and Yui are different. He knows this. They never interact on the same level as Hachiman and Yukino do. And even in that familiarity, often enough it's on par with a kid he had to babysit, and less any sort of true peer. For the most part, she's kind of a fluff-brained mascot. She still has her old friends and still enjoys her popularity. Getting to know her the level he did wasn't enough to make them close or make them friends. It was just enough for him to put up with her jerkiness without fighting back, and accept when she was being a decent person without wondering what her endgame was. So, when he found out it was Yui's dog, it didn't sting as much. When it comes to Yukino, however, he's connected with her as two birds, though not necessarily of a feather. They were both loners, and even though he knew they were different kinds of loners, it was still a commonality they shared. They were both socially isolated. They both knew the pain of bullying and exclusion. They were both smart and quick-witted, arguing and bickering even when she said totally horrible and hurtful things to him, was something he enjoyed enough to keep doing. And by book 4, you could tell he really does enjoy it. You see firsthand just how close they've become, how deeply connected through their bickering and witty dueling. It was this back and forth that got them to where they could speak freely and openly without reserve. For loners, anyway. Yes, they weren't exactly the same, but there were similarities that left both of them more comfortable with each other than they were with anyone else. It was because of this, because of their similarities, and his ability to easily pick up on and interpret Yukino, that Hachiman made his first mistake. and it takes to nearly the end of the book for him to acknowledge that mistake. Day in and day out, he repeated his beliefs and stances and everything, trying to believe he hadn't acted against them, trying with all he had to not have to admit his mistake. No matter how much he wanted to believe he understood Yukino, because he could be relaxed with her, because he could easily read her and act accordingly. He didn't. He couldn't. But he wanted to. He wants to understand her and connect with her because he admires her. Unlike him, despite her circumstances, she didn't give up when he did. She did what he couldn't, became what he couldn't, because she had the strength to carry on, and to stand firm no matter how others were weighing her down. And that drew him to her. It was because of that admiration, and learning how to interpret some of what she does, that led him to making assumptions about her. And those assumptions led him to creating an idol of her in his head to admire. Yukino is beautiful and smart and sharp and cold, and she always says what she thinks, regardless of the consequences. And she never lies. But that image was wrong, and far too perfect for anyone to carry. And when it cracks, when he sees the lies and understands what that means, and how that changes everything she said and did to him, all the lies that came from that first one, he realizes that the idol was all a creation, and he doesn't know what to do. He just knows he was wrong. He was wrong for creating such an image in the first place. He was wrong for letting himself become comfortable with her. He was wrong for not upholding all the twisted values that had kept him safe. He was wrong for letting down his guard. And worst of all, he was wrong for forcing all that on her. And that's the difference between Hachiman learning about Yui versus Yukino. There was no distorted image of Yui to betray, so it was easy to shrug off everything. But Yukino, even though he won't admit it, he connected with intellectually and emotionally. He enjoys spending time with her like he would a friend. Hachiman never offered to Yui, "Let's be friends." But he did to Yukino, and despite her shutting him down hard, they started building a pretty solid relationship. It's so much harder with Yukino than with Yui because this image was created, and it wasn't just an image he admired, it was one he yearned for. Being forced to see that image for what it was broke his heart. And he doesn't want to acknowledge that, because doing so means he betrayed himself harder than he already admits. And if he could betray himself so thoroughly, then no one finds him to be of any worth, no one cares about him. Even the one he connected with only did so out of guilt, and wouldn't let him know that guilt was there. Then, can he trust anyone or anything? By the end of Book 5, Hachiman is quite miserable. He still wants to hold on to who he was prior to meeting Yukino and Yui. He wants to be that person, because he didn't hate that person. But now, after everything, being betrayed thrice, and finding out the last few months only existed because of guilt, and nothing real. Now what does he do? Betrayed by Yui, Yukino, and himself. And like he has so many times before, he's giving up. Only, this time what he's losing is what love he had for himself. He's acknowledged his worthlessness and accepted being the bottom rung for years, but he could still live happily accepting himself, even creating rules and ideals just to justify loving himself when no one else does. But now he has misgivings about himself, about his own rules and beliefs, and about how easily he broke them, even after constantly telling himself not to. And he can see he's starting to hate himself. Pretty deep for a light novel series, huh? Thank you, Wataru-san, for writing this. I'm loving every minute reading and pondering it. I love these characters more with each book. You've done a wonderful job. Thank you. And to everyone watching, thank you very much for your time. I hope you enjoyed this. Stay safe and healthy out there.